All right, so now it's time to wrap the shell, and what we wrap it with is this gum tape, and you can use different sizes depending on the size of shell. But anyway, this is I think what is it? 1 inch gum tape, and you'll notice one side of this is shiny, one's dull. The shiny side is actually the glue, and it's activated when you put water on it. And what I like to do is get a sponge and a little container of water to keep it wet, and I'll drag my tape through it to wet the tape. But first let me show you what we've done with the shell. So I went ahead and took the tape off and put a couple of pieces of the gum tape on it. Now there's a pattern to wrapping these, and you notice I went ahead and drew some lines around the axis on this to help demonstrate this. Anyway, let's get started. I'll show you how we do this. Oh, and I left the spillette sticking out a little bit and hot glued around it, and so it'll be easier to see for sure when we get ready to put a time fuse in there. And it'll be, we're going to end up humping up a little bit, but that's okay. That's going to be where our lift is on the bottom, so it shouldn't affect going in the shell, dropping it in the shell. So anyway, here's what we do is I put it down on top and put my finger on top of it and just drag it through the water, or drag it through the sponge, and that wets it. And then we're going to put this along one axis. Okay, so that's our first go around, and then we're going to turn our shell and we're going to go across the other axis. And I pre-cut a whole bunch of strips of this, by the way. And I cut them all long enough to overlap a couple of inches, inch and a half or so, because it's going to grow as it gets bigger. And that should, if we end up not needing any more of those, it should still allow it to overlap a little bit on each piece. All right, so you can see what we got is a cross like that. And the next thing we want to do is fill in these areas that we have that doesn't have tape on it. So we'll simply overlap a little bit. From the other piece. And yes, I have access to one of the wasp machines a friend has, but I kind of like doing this myself. For competition shells, if we're doing a bunch of shells for our club or something, we use it, but other than that, I prefer to do it this way. Takes a long time, but so does everything else with fireworks making them. All right, so you can see I've got one whole section of that filled in, and now I've got to do this final section. And then we'll kind of burnish this. And as my sponge dries, I'll add more, I'll dip it back in the water You don't want it just sloppy wet, but wet enough to, when you press down on it, it wets the tape well. All right, one final piece here. Okay. So that is basically half of one wrap scenario, and we usually do like 5 total full ones, and I'll show you the next piece to this. But I can take this little piece of PVC pipe coupling and just roll it over here and burnish this and keep it nice and pretty flat, smooth. All right, so that gets us in that direction. Now what we'll do is, and then we can still see that where the two hemis are put together. So this will be our axis here. And then we'll pick another vertical direction here. And I'll draw this out. I typically don't do this for myself, but to show you kind of the scenario for wrapping, I'll do that. All right, so this time we're going to put tape along this axis. And the whole idea for this is that we get an even thickness on the shell, so it's not lopsided, it's spherical. All right, so we've got along that axis. Now we're going to go back along this axis, and we drew, and now you can see that we have these little slices in this location. So same thing, we're going to fill these in. It's kind of hard to follow once you get going, once you get everything taped, so you have to pay attention to what you're doing here. But same thing, we're going to overlap a little bit, fill all those sections in. Okay, that fills in one quadrant. Now we can see the other here, or whatever you call that, a slice. One more. All right, so I got that filled in. Now once again, let's burnish it. And you do have to kind of keep up with if you want it even, you kind of have to keep up with where your axes are. But another good reason for having, or another good thing about having a little stub up here is that gives you some orientation. All right, so this is actually one revolution or whatever. It's one sequence and we usually do about 5 of those of what we just did. And you can keep a check on the diameter of it and keep measuring it and just look and see what the circumference is of a 6-inch shell. Hard to believe that this is almost 19 inches around this thing. It always amazes me. Anyway, we're going to keep a check on this to make sure it's not too big for our tube, but that is enough wrappings on it to contain the explosion. And once again, the more you can contain the explosion, the more powerful it'll be, so it'll spread your stars out further. If you stop now, it would just kind of break open and dump them out. It would ignite them, but it wouldn't throw them out. So it'd be more of a horsetail effect. Not exactly, but something similar, or a real tight willow. But that's one go of it. So I'll keep going on this, and we'll let this dry, and then I will show you how we're going to put the time fuse in, leader it, put the lift under it, and complete it for firing. So there you go. That's where we're at right now, and I'll be right back, and you'll see it finished. And I'll go ahead and come back when I get the total here, so you can get it finished in the wrapping part, so you can kind of see what that looks like in comparison to one that we haven't wrapped yet. So anyway, I will come back after a while then. All right, I've finished all 5 layers of this, and this is what we got. Smooths out pretty good. And let's measure. Now the circumference of a 6-inch diameter is 18.84. Let's see what we have here. So we've got roughly 18 3/8. So that's good. That gives us a little clearance in the tube. Actually, if I tighten it up, it's probably more like 18 1/4. So that should give us enough to put a leader around it and get in our tube. So we'll let this dry, then I'll come back and show you how I do the lift on there. So there you go. Oh, and I was going to compare it to one that haven't wrapped yet, so you can see the difference here. And make sure you label them, because you will definitely forget what it is once you get it out of the drying box if you haven't labeled it. So there you go. I'll be back as soon as I get this thing dried, and we'll proceed further. All right, thanks. So the shell is dry that we just taped, and so now it's time to put lift under it and leader it, and let me show you how I do that. Okay, so the shell is dry now, and I went ahead and cut open the bottom to expose the spillet, and that's where the time fuse will be going. And the recommended time for time fuse for 6-inch shell is anywhere from 5 to 6 seconds. So I have this time fuse cut at 5 seconds, and I have cross matched it with black match. And we will just be inserting that into the spillet. I'll glue that up, hot glue that up really well. And you have to be real careful with doing this, because if any fire gets through this when it's the lift is lit, then it will explode in the tube or coming out of the tube. And so that's the reason we have to be real careful with that. So let me hot glue that, and then once that dries, I'll be right back. Alright, so I hot glued the time fuse in, and you can see I piled it up pretty good on there. And now we have to determine how much lift to put under this. Now, let me show you what I've got here. I like to take shells apart, and professional shells apart, to see things like this, like how much lift they used on this based on the weight of the shell. You can see how they put time fuse in. They usually do 2 of them in their shells. This is made in China, and they cross match it the same. You can see where this has come loose. There's cross match in there, but they also put a solution on top of it to help ignite it even, make it ignite even easier. So I took this guy apart, I measured it, and it's 1,065 grams. Now, the amount of lift that was in here was 146 grams, and so that makes it 13.7% of the weight of the shell is what the lift amount is. Now, I usually gauge mine based on 10% of the shell weight, but recommendations show anywhere from 4 to 6 ounces, which is 113.4 to 170 grams for a 6-inch shell. Now, using my 10% on this guy, this weighs 1,440 grams, and so 10% would be 144 grams. And if I went with the percentage that the professional shell was, the 13.7% would make 197 grams for this guy. Well, keep in mind the recommended is between 113 and 170. So I'm right in the middle of, with my 10%, I'll be right in the middle of that. And so that's a pretty good gauge then, is 10% of the weight of the shell is the amount of lift. But in this particular one, I'm going to go with the 12% on it and go 175 grams. So what I did is I measured out 2FA and 175 grams, and that's how much I'll be using to lift this shell. I have a pre-made lift cup. I just find it easier on these larger ones to just buy the lift cups. You can certainly make them yourself. On the smaller shells, I've used little teeny I've used little cups like this. I've used these cups and cut them off. I've used baggies. So any number of ways, as long as you can get the contain the black powder and have your time fuse in it. So anyway, that's what I'm going to do with this. Now, the amount of quick match, I've cut this at 4 feet. That's just what I do for 6-inch shells. I measured a couple of different 6-inch lengths of 6-inch tubes that I have. One was 30-inch, one was 36-inch, and so this would give an ample amount. Now, in competition, they're going to give us leaders to put on these that have a port for putting an E-match, and it'll also have visco, like a normal shell you'd get when you buy one. It'd have visco on there too if you need to hand light it, and they will take E-matches in the field and we'll match these up like that. So that's how we do for competition. So I'll just end up putting a little piece of tape on this end of this to keep it fire out of it or sparks out of it. The other end I've stripped back a couple of inches, and this is what we will put in our down in our cup along with the black powder. So let me go ahead and put 175 grams in here of lift. I will push the leader down in there. I push the quick match down in there, and then we'll set our shell down in there with the time fuse and nest it right in there. So that's what we'll do with that, and then I'll tape this up. I'll tape this all up and come back and show you kind of the way I finish mine. So I'll be right back. Alright, so here is the shell with all the leader and lift complete. And I just use tape and tape it all up, make sure it's not going to come loose. Tape it up the side across your quick match. And I may end up putting some string around this somehow to lower it in the gun, and I probably will reinforce it a little better for that. But basically that's all there is to this, and I'll be putting a label on it with all my contact information, so if something happens and they need to know whose shell it is or what kind of shell it is, all the information will be on there, including my cell phone number, so they can reach me. And I have had shell returned to me when they didn't fire it, or it didn't fire for some reason, and so they were able to tell exactly whose that was and how to get up with me on that. So anyway, that is a oh, and I also will always mark it again just in the interim so I know what that is. But one other thing I wanted to show you is this is the lift and quick match that came off of this professional shell here, and you can see that the lift is in the baggie, and that's why you'll typically find these, and it'll just be on here balled up around the time fuse. And I could do that with mine, and but when it's down in there in the tube, I know all the powder's down in there, settled down. I know all my stuff is stuck down in the powder, and I don't know, this to me, and even though the gases are gonna light it probably regardless, but that's just me. I just like mine loose in there. Of course, if there's a hole in it, the stuff's gonna come out, but this is pretty tough lift cups. So anyway, that's how this one came off of there, and you see it does already have a port for a time fuse, for a quick match, and visco fuse section, so if you're hand lighting these. So anyway, that's what one of my shells is for competition, and I've got 4 in this category. This will be level 3, I think, level 3 ball shell competition. So anyway, I will do my best to tape these, to make a tape of these or video of these when they're shot, and get back to you with the results. Of course, that'll be the sometime in August. So anyway, there it is, and I'll see you on the next one.